The side mirror snapped off in Karen's hands with a sharp crack that echoed through the parking area. She stood there, stunned, holding the twisted metal and plastic like a grotesque trophy. The EMTs stared in absolute horror. "Ma'am, you just destroyed city property," Jake said slowly, his voice barely controlled. "That's a felony." But Karen's mind was spinning in a different direction entirely. The broken mirror represented something larger, proof of the ambulance's shoddy construction, evidence of the city's disregard for quality standards. If this vehicle was so poorly made that a simple shake could break it, what other safety violations might it have? "This is clearly a defective vehicle," she declared, waving the mirror triumphantly. "You're operating unsafe equipment in my community." Her voice rose to new heights. What if this mirror had fallen off during an emergency? What if it had hit a child? The EMT's partner, a woman named Sarah, stepped forward with forced calm. "Ma'am, I need you to understand. Mrs. Henderson is dying. Every second we waste here is a second she doesn't have." Karen's expression softened for just a moment. She'd known Gladys Henderson for 3 years. They'd served on the garden committee together before that unfortunate Petunia incident. But then she caught sight of herself in the ambulance's remaining mirror, saw her perfectly styled hair and her "Hello President" pin gleaming in the emergency lights, and her resolve hardened again. If Mrs. Henderson is dying, then she deserves a properly maintained emergency vehicle, not this death trap. Karen began circling the ambulance like a shark. "Look at this rust spot. These tires are barely street legal. When was this thing last inspected?" She ran her hands along the vehicle's surface, searching for more evidence of negligence. Her fingers found a small dent near the back door. "Aha, structural damage." She pressed against the dent, and when it didn't give way immediately, she pressed harder, then harder still. The metal groaned. "Karen, stop." The voice came from behind her. Tom Martinez, her next-door neighbor, jogged up in his bathrobe. "What the hell are you doing?" "I'm protecting this community." Karen's face was flushed now, her carefully applied makeup starting to run with perspiration. "These people think they can just steamroll over our property values with their substandard equipment. Mrs. Henderson is dying, you psychopath." The word psychopath hit Karen like a slap. She whirled around, still gripping the ambulance's back door handle. "I am not psycho. I am thorough. I am responsible. I am." She yanked on the handle to emphasize her point, but the door was heavier than expected. Her momentum carried her backward, and she heard something snap inside the mechanism. The back door swung open, then immediately sagged at an odd angle, hanging by a single hinge. Everyone stared in stunned silence. Karen looked at the broken door, then at the EMTs, then at Tom's horrified face. For the first time all evening, she felt a flicker of uncertainty. That was already broken," she said weakly. "This just proves my point about the vehicle's condition." But even as she said it, she could see in their faces that she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Karen Fleming's manicured fingernails scraped against the ambulance's metal door handle with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. The emergency vehicle sat parked, illegally, in her opinion, across 2 spaces in the Willowbrook Gardens Haverway visitor parking area. Its red and blue lights cast dancing shadows across her perfectly maintained front lawn, and that was absolutely unacceptable. "Excuse me," she shrieked at the EMT loading equipment from the back. "This is a fire lane. You can't park here." The young EMT, sweat beading on his forehead, barely glanced up. "Ma'am, we're responding to a medical emergency at 42 Maple Court. We'll be gone in. I don't care if the Pope is having a heart attack." Karen's voice reached a pitch that made nearby dogs howl. "There are rules. This community has standards." She gestured wildly at the HOA guidelines laminated and posted on every corner. Section 4.2 clearly states that emergency vehicles must park in designated areas only. The EMT stared at her incredulously. "Lady, Mrs. Henderson is having a stroke. We need to." Mrs. Henderson. Karen's eyes narrowed. That was the woman who dared to plant petunias instead of the HOA-approved marigolds. Well, maybe if she'd followed the landscaping guidelines, karma wouldn't have caught up with her. The EMT's partner jogged up, wheeling a gurney. "We need to move, Jake," she's coding. But Karen was already examining the ambulance with the intensity of a building inspector. She ran her hands along the side, checking for scratches against the paint of the nearby lamppost. "Look at this. You've damaged community property." She pointed to a microscopic scuff mark. "This will require a full repaint. Do you have insurance for this?" "Ma'am." "Please step aside," Jake pleaded. But Karen was on a mission now. She marched to the front of the ambulance and positioned herself directly in front of it, arms crossed. "Nobody moves until we file an incident report. I'm the HOO president, and I have authority here." "You're blocking an ambulance from saving someone's life," Jake's partner shouted. "And you're blocking compliance with community standards." Karen shot back. She pulled out her phone and started photographing the ambulance from every angle. Violation of parking protocol, damage to community property, unauthorized use of emergency lighting in a residential zone after 9 p.m. The EMTs exchanged desperate glances. Mrs. Henderson was dying, and this woman was conducting a property inspection. That's when Karen noticed the muddy tire tracks on the pristine concrete. Something inside her snapped, not toward reason, but deeper into her obsession. She grabbed the ambulance's side mirror and gave it a violent shake. "These tracks will stain. Do you know how much it costs to pressure wash these surfaces?" The mirror creaked ominously under her grip. "Sarah," the EMT pulled out her radio with shaking hands. "Dispatch, we need a supervisor and police backup at Willowbrook Gardens. We have a civilian who's actively destroying our ambulance." The word destroying sent a shock through Karen's system. She looked at the broken mirror in one hand, the mangled door hanging behind her, and felt reality crashing in like a cold wave. But instead of backing down, she felt herself doubling down, as if forward was the only direction left. "I'm not destroying anything," she protested. "I'm documenting safety violations. This ambulance is a lawsuit waiting to happen." She gestured wildly at the damaged vehicle. "What if the door had fallen off during transport? What if—" "Karen." Tom's voice was quiet now, almost gentle. "Mrs. Henderson is going to die because of you." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Karen felt something crack inside her chest. Not her resolve, but something deeper. She thought about Ladies Henderson's laugh during garden committee meetings, the way she'd always brought homemade cookies, how she'd apologized profusely about the petunias and replanted them with marigolds the very next day. But then she looked at the ambulance again, saw the mud tracks and the parking violation and the scratched lamp post, and her brain latched onto the familiar comfort of rules and regulations. "If she dies, it'll be because she was transported in a defective vehicle," Karen said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "I'm actually saving lives here. This ambulance should be impounded until it passes a proper safety inspection." That's when she noticed the fuel cap. It was slightly loose, probably from routine maintenance, but to Karen's fevered mind, it represented yet another violation. She lunged for it, twisting it with both hands. "Fuel containment breach," she announced. "Environmental hazard." The cap came off entirely, clattering to the ground. The smell of diesel fuel wafted up, and Karen found herself staring into the tank opening like she'd discovered the smoking gun in a murder case. Jake stepped forward slowly, like he was approaching a wild animal. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the vehicle. You're tampering with emergency equipment during an active call. This is beyond property damage now." But Karen was lost in her own logic. She grabbed the fuel cap and held it up like evidence. This was improperly secured. What if it had come loose during transport? What if fuel had spilled in my community? Sirens wailed in the distance. Police backup arriving. The sound seemed to snap something in Karen's brain. She looked around at the chaos she'd created, the broken mirror, the hanging door, the fuel cap in her hands, the EMTs staring at her with a mixture of horror and disgust. She started, then stopped. The sirens grew louder. Sarah keyed her radio again. "Dispatch, we need that backup unit for patient transport. Our ambulance is compromised." As the police cars pulled into the parking area, their lights joining the ambulances in a disco of red and blue, Karen felt the weight of what she'd done settling on her shoulders. But even now, even with handcuffs approaching and Mrs. Henderson's life hanging in the balance, she couldn't quite bring herself to admit she was wrong. "You'll thank me when the investigation reveals the truth about this vehicle," she said quietly, clutching the fuel cap like a talisman. But as the officers approached and Tom shook his head in disgust, Karen caught a glimpse of her reflection in the ambulance's remaining mirror. For the first time, she looked less like an HOA president and more like exactly what Tom had called her. The question was, what would she see when she looked in the mirror tomorrow?